exactly the way you phrased it. And yet we want to click, snap the fingers of mass of people.
Well, it doesn't happen to have that mass, the mass embrace of this. It doesn't happen overnight. I mean, there's 300 people at this conference, let's say, rather than 3 billion. But it starts like that. We all have a sphere of influence. Some of us have brought families or friends, hopefully someone new who wasn't just part of the choir. I know Jordan Pease, he was talking to me, you know, Jordan's the producer of the conference. He and I talked about this very, very closely about how do we bring in the audience of people who are totally unfamiliar with any of this and who would think we're a bunch of kooks, okay? We really wanted to figure out a way of how to tap that audience. And now we knew that hey, one of the things that happens with a conference like this is we all get recharged by seeing, by the fellowship of coming together with other people who want to be the change agents of a new paradigm. And it's very important that we have fellowship. I crave it because a lot of times I feel like I'm out alone, kind of in the desert and all that kind of thing. So when I come together with a group like this, it's like, oh, my batteries get recharged and I'm just bathing in this hopeful, optimistic energy. There's just this passion that's going on. That's very important. But we really, you know, hope that, well, maybe each person brings a few who might be hard skeptics, who might be totally unexposed, but are willing to be vulnerable to something that actually makes sense. Oh, you know, if you're unfamiliar with any of this and all of a sudden you hear a Catherine Austin Fitts lecture, you know, it's like, holy cow, what was that? But you know that something real happened. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
I'm just thinking that could happen if this was like a quarterly event.
Mm-hmm.
It will happen sort of eventually. It would have to happen over and over because
Yeah.
we like to attract light.
This is being planned to be a series. The architects of the new paradigm are planned to be a series that'll move from place to place. So that was part of Jordan's original vision. I think it's a good one. And this was kind of the beta trial, right? See what the response was and get feedback, see how we can do this in ever more effective ways to bring in other citizens who are curious, but who have been unexposed to this. Because I think that, you know, there's been great articulation of what some of the issues and certainly some of the solutions are here. So, you know, even though there's these temptations for fractures as the egos get stroked in this whole thing, and you know we tend to get off track. You know, we can remember that, hey, being kind to each other, same thing that we teach our children again. It's these basic lessons that pull us back, and it's easy in a group like this where smiles return smiles. There are other places where smiles. If I go to an academic conference where it's filled with scientists who believe that everything they've been taught in the textbook and how they got their PhD and all that's, you know, they're the experts, and then I start talking about this stuff, a smile is not necessarily returned for a smile. I'm going to tell you something very interesting. How many of you are familiar with something called 350.org? Okay? 350.org has the banner of being the most widely recognized organization that is combating global climate change, global warming. It's headed by Bill McKibben, who many describe as the planet's leading ecologist. I had a chance to attend a conference in Toronto it was in December. And Bill was the closing keynote speaker at that conference. And I had never met him. I was certainly familiar with who he was. And you know, I was in this room filled with kind of the Canadian who's who of people who were doing, you know, ground level work at the municipal level. as far as what the impacts of climate change mean to Canada. Flooding, all of the engineering, the infrastructure, insurance companies, banks, you name it. And a lot of environmental people there, environmental scientists and all that. And they were hanging on Bill's every word at this conference. And there's hundreds of people in this room. And it came to the end of his presentation, and two people asked a question. And I was one of those. And I stood up and I said, I appreciate your wonderful presentation. I said, you know, I noticed that when you're talking about the renewable energy portion of helping to address climate change, you appropriately mentioned wind and solar, but there is so much that you left out. I said, are you aware that there are many very promising, very high power density technologies that, if given a little bit of support, could be total game changers in all of this? And also that many of these technologies have been developed in black budget programs, and the energy technologies themselves have been applied to advanced propulsion technologies that can take us to the stars. And I'd like to extend the invitation to you to not just have to believe my words, but where I can take you somewhere and have you witness it yourself. Would you accept such an invitation? And I'm standing up in front of 300 people, and there's Bill McKibben on the stage. And he says, well, they're doing great things in Germany with solar, and wind is a really great source of energy. Are there any other questions? So talk about cognitive dissonance or diversion or whatever. And you know what? I expected that would probably be the response, because I've seen it before, you know, under similar circumstances with others who were the experts and supposedly the leader and supposedly the call it whatever, all right? And then I had, the conference ended at that point. And I was kind of like getting my stuff together, and I'm out in the lobby getting ready to leave, and just checking out. And I noticed, here comes Bill, and he walks out into the front of the hotel, and clearly was like, it kind of looked like, well, someone was to take him to the airport, and or he was waiting for a taxi. Clearly was kind of nervous, like, okay, who's, you know, where are they? And so I went out and went up to him, and I said, hi, Bill, and went to shake his hand. He's like, oh yeah, you're the guy. Yeah. He goes, well, give me your card, and I'll contact you. And I said, well, would you like a ride to the airport? I have a car here. And he's like, oh, no. And he immediately just like gets on his phone and walks away. Talk about an incredible opportunity for like a one-on-one to like, you know, well, you said something very interesting. Could you speak more? And I was offering him a 1-hour opportunity, right? And he literally just picks up his cell phone and just walks away.
Any possibility he was read in on it and told not to talk to you?
Who's to know? But it was curious, all right? Does that mean he hasn't done good work or anything like that? No, it doesn't mean anything like that. But what it does mean is that there is an entrainment of some sort in this. It does mean that there's a vested interest of some sort in having a message that is truncated, that only allows a conversation of narrow bandwidth rather than having the whole conversation. So it was curious, and I have no judgment of him, all right? And I would even say this, as I was feeling it rising up in me, some feeling of grievance toward him, this is the ego getting charged up now. I have a forgiveness ritual that I go through at the end of the day, all right? And I did it to hold him in mind, and it's gone. And I was even debating about whether I would even bring it up here, because it could potentially result in a judgment. And that's not what I'm calling for here. I'm simply using it as an example of how things aren't always as they appear to be. And even those who we hear about or may have recognized as leaders, be careful on putting leader or expert labels. The best way to assert leadership is to take it on yourself, all right? That's... Excuse me?
Is there any technology out there a person can have personally to block entrainment or whatever that is?
Okay, great question. Yes, the question was, is there a technology that helps people to block entrainment? And if you were listening to Catherine's talk in here, I don't know if that exact question came about, is there a technology to block it? But I'll tell you what she said, what I heard her say was, she goes to the well of spiritual power to get her through it. That is the armor that she puts on. And being out in nature, exactly, going on the digital diet and all that kind of thing. Makes sense. Now, I would say this. I do that same thing in my way, of course, and that is the armor. And I'll tell you, our fields are extremely powerful. Our bioelectric field and the field that comes from our directed thought is incredibly powerful. And it goes beyond the technologies they're using, because our thoughts are not contained in space-time. They go beyond that. They're more powerful. More powerful. So using your own resources of spirit, and it's available to all of us. It's the best way. I can't speak of the technological tools that might be available. I imagine they exist. I don't know what they are. I know what works for me. And I'm sure many others who are more experienced in that, I would say probably if you ask Kimberly, she'd say going into meditation and all that helps too. I agree that anything that helps us to keep the distorting energies at bay, and that tend to disorganize our thoughts, get us agitated and all that. Any practices we have that get us in that space help.
I'm aware of only one of these new energy technologies that's coming out on the market, or is presently out on the market right now, and it's an over-unity magnet motor called the Garbon, made in Ireland.
Yeah, there's a company, an Irish company called Steorn, spelled S-T-E-O-R-N. They have some small devices based on a technology platform they call Orbo, and it's based on some magnetic principles, and it does show a mild over-unity effect for the small devices they have right now, and that's real. It's commercial. It's real. It's been validated. And again, it shows that there are, some of these things making their way out there. Now, to me, those things are important, but they're more of a novelty at this point, because where I want to move toward is having some real energy-generating things that can move us along from an environment that's been heavily degraded, and where the trajectory is in the wrong direction, and start to bring correction to that. So that means that you really have to have scalable, high power density technologies that are doing this. But I'm glad you brought it up, because I think it's notable.
Are there any others on the market besides Garbon?
There is another technology that's being marketed in Europe by a company called Roche, R-O-S-C-H. They also have a distributor called Gaia, and they are using, I believe it's a German company, but they have an interesting technology that is using principles of buoyancy and gravity, coupled with a proprietary generator design where they are producing excess electrical output from their device. And that's been fairly recent, but that's another introduction. Yes?
Are you familiar at all with this new Breakthrough Energy Coalition that Gates is trying to organize?
Okay, good question. What is this Breakthrough Energy Coalition that Bill Gates announced at the Paris climate talks? All right, I don't know if you're aware of this, but if you remember the opening day of the Paris climate talks on this, it was a particular Monday just several weeks ago, the photo image that was put on every newspaper, every magazine cover, all over the internet was essentially, the G7 leaders, Obama and the Chinese premier, but front and center, Bill Gates, all right? And Bill Gates is announcing the Breakthrough Energy Coalition. Curious, all right? And he's doing it supposedly in concert with the Billionaire Boys Club. Zuckerberg, Facebook, Soros, Branson, you name it, all the household name billionaires supposedly are all part of this Breakthrough Energy Coalition. And Catherine sends me this email, with that picture. And she's like, the caption she had under it was, "Oh, how curious, the sovereign nation of Microsoft shows up at the Paris climate talks." And I thought, oh, that's good. I ought to have that in my presentation here. But when I went to the website, well, I would say the first thing I got, immediately I got email back from my two Dutch brothers, Jeroen van Straten and Robert Dupper, who sent a response to what Catherine had sent. And it's like, oh man, is this not a co-option of the Breakthrough Energy Movement, their actual name in Holland? And Gates is calling his thing the Breakthrough Energy Coalition. I mean, it certainly feels like a co-option, so we were immediately suspicious. So I go onto their website, actually, even a week after it had been announced, maybe even later, after it had been announced, go on their website. It's very, very kind of basic. And, on the link that says contact us, I thought, well, I'll contact them. Click on the button. Click on the button. Nothing happens. It's dead. Now, how is it that the Billionaire Boys Club can set up something that's, embracing disruptive energy technology to save the world, and they got all the resources in the world to put up a website, and yet the contact us button doesn't work? Now, is that not a hurry-up effort of some sort? What's up with that? I'm just going to leave it at that right now.
Are there any healing technologies that are breakthrough, kind of new, and how close are we to seeing them?
Are there any new energy technologies that are healing technologies as well that are available, and how soon will we see them? Yes. In fact, that conference that I mentioned, I'm gonna go back. Well, I'll tell you what. I mentioned a conference called the Conference on Future Energy in Albuquerque at the end of July. It's every July. At that conference, Dr. Thomas Vallone and his wife, Jackie Vallone, they integrate both the energy side and the healing technology side, electromagnetic healing technologies, and Jackie Vallone is an expert in that. Okay, and they're based out of Washington, out of the Washington D.C. area. They live in Maryland, and yeah, and so they always talk about that. They always have that as topics. In that, great question, by the way, because that is one of the other implications of all of Valone. That's how you spell Valone. Okay, so this one here. Technology always shows up ahead of the wisdom needed to use it wisely. Certainly we've experienced that, right? Nuclear, think of the nuclear age. What happened? Well, we learned how to blow up cities. We learned how to cause a waste issue of things that are toxically polluting, you know, require tens of thousands of years for that waste to remediate itself because of all these high energy neutrons that shoot off of it and fry you. We've got rivers like the Columbia River, where I live downstream of, that are having toxic plumes coming from the Hanford Reservation. We've got Fukushima now polluting the Pacific Ocean, all this kind of thing. So clearly we adopted a technology well in advance of the wisdom to use it correctly. Now, is that going to happen with these type of technologies as well? Well, the potential certainly exists. What is very safe to say is that they're already being used in black budget operations. Black budget operations is largely what you've been hearing Richard Dolan speak of, Catherine Austin Fitts speak of. It is the direction of public funding and illicit funds that come from perhaps the drug trade, the human trafficking trades, these things, where those funds are directed into secret programs that largely are military-oriented, secret corporate alliances with that, and that they are being used for purposes that are not aligned with life. That's the gentle way of saying it. In fact, generally they're being used for evil. How about that? Okay. So, yeah. Yeah. Yes, radiation.
I've heard that bone fusion, possibly Patterson cells or other types of bone or LENR can help reduce radiation in the environment. Now, are you aware of any of that type of technology or any other technology that will reduce radiation quicker than the
Okay. Yeah, so the question is about, do any of these new energy technologies have applications to remediate radiation? Absolutely. In fact, many of them do. And several of those have been proposed to the Department of Energy, which manages all of our nuclear power plants. You know, those have been proposed and soundly kicked out of the room. And in certain cases where the inventor was felt a heavy hand upon their head. Okay? When you look at how nuclear waste is handled right now, it's not remediated. What it is it's generally just contained and buried, and it guarantees nothing. Hanford's a great example of that. And so just looking for a nuclear repository, there is no absolutely fail-safe guarantee that that's the result. Many of these technologies that you'll hear about as plasma-based have the ability to remediate nuclear waste. How do you do that? You actually cause a nuclear transmutation, taking a radioactive isotope, changing it into a non-radioactive isotope, or into an actual different element.
Is it like a volcano changing rock back into new rock where you reform it completely and it recoalesces without the instability?
Well, the question was, is that like what happens in a volcano where you have material coming up and it's changing form, in essence? Reforming. It's actually different. This is actually a nuclear process that is changing the number of neutrons at the nucleus itself to make it a non-radioactive isotope. Yeah. If you, I can tell you this, there are nuclear transmutations that happen inside biological organisms, including our bodies, including in chickens, including in bacteria, and every lightning storm, that's a big plasma arc. Every bolt of lightning is a big plasma arc. There are nuclear transmutations happening. And it's very common, it's incredibly common. In so many of these new energy technologies that are using a plasma, which kind of, if you look up the definition of plasma, it means hot ionized gas. That's essentially what's going on there. And it has very unique properties. But what almost invariably happens is when you are creating a plasma around some type of electrode and you measure what the constituents of the metal are before you generate the plasma and after you generate the plasma, there are new and different metals there. That means nuclear transmutation has happened. And it's very easy to prove. So the fact that that's happening kind of is in defiance of a lot of kind of conventional nuclear physics understanding, where you have to have these incredible temperatures and pressures and all this to cause these type of reactions. But it's so overwhelmingly common and could be brought to bear on nuclear remediation. And it has been proposed for the Fukushima to address that. But again, yeah, I mean, there are cold fusion processes that are plasma based as well. So. Yeah, so yeah, this becomes the ability to transmute elements. It starts to get us to the Star Trek replicator type of concept here, where we can make every material that we need. So again, there would the whole thing about rare earth elements, it kind of goes away. It's just like it's just another element. It's not rare anymore because we can actually make it.
I want you to answer this question two ways. You know, how you feel right brain and how you feel left brain. Are you aware of any technology, to kind of extend what he's saying, that can remotely affect our biology, in other words, individuals being targeted, or affect our thought process?
Okay, so the question is, am I familiar with any technology that can be used remotely to affect our biology or our thought processes? Yes, absolutely. There are directed beam technologies that can do that. There are technologies that can produce.
RHIC, EDOM.
Yeah, which are acronyms for various types of energetic technologies. I can tell you, I've directly had experience of certain things that I believe were, let's say, a different way of ringing my doorbell. But it was like right here and jolted me bolt upright in my bed because it was so intensely disruptive to my own brain. And it's like, okay, I get it. But again, being in fear of these things is not why we're here. All right? Let me just kind of wrap up a couple things here, and then we'll take a couple more questions. And you'll be the first, okay? So, you know, even though that the technology that always comes in advance of the wisdom to use it wisely, you know, we can make the appeal to consider in advance, what would we do with this? How do we make sure that we use this peacefully, that it's only used in ways that are aligned with life, instead of used for manipulation of life? And this is a very heady part of this whole thing. And it requires a very mature look at this, and planning, and getting the populace engaged. Not the way the whole chemtrail program is, right? Which feels like a big experiment and hidden in plain sight, all right? I could go into that. I've had a lot of deep personal experience on that whole chemtrail thing since its start in the late 90s. Okay, but we have to get the populace engaged in these discussions about how to use these things wisely. These technologies, very high power density, you know, very attractive potentially to be used in weaponized applications. So what about that? Can we prevent that? Well, what did our ancestors going back hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of years, when they you know, saw this fire? I can make fire, all right? What did they likely do with that after they learned that, okay, I can have warmth, I can keep the animals at bay, I can cook my mastodon on it? You can bet that probably one of the first things they did with it is they learned they could burn down the other guy's hut. Yep. So it's interesting. Can we prevent these things from being used for evil and destructive purposes? Well, only, again, if we have the conversation, all right? And, you know, it's human nature is a funny thing, right? But I do think that the technologies are coming anyway. They are coming. We have to be prepared, all right? And we have to lead. We can't just let other people make the decisions for us on this, because unless they're coming from a very consciously grounded place to align these things with life, we know likely the opposite's going to happen. That's predictable, right? Okay, so we have to lead on this, and that means that in our calling out, we have to call for an evolution, not just in the energy technology, but also in human consciousness. It's a huge part of this whole thing, all right? It's why I said at the beginning of this that all of this is more important than the nuts and bolts stuff I was talking about yesterday. This is really where the rubber meets the road, okay? So people may think because I'm engaged in all of this stuff that I think that this is the answer to it all. And I'll tell you what, it's not. It's absolutely not. The technology is not our savior. The best that it is a bridge. It's a bridge for us as a civilization in much the similar way that someone who has a broken leg uses a pair of crutches to help speed the healing of that leg, all right? But the idea isn't to keep the crutch. Once you no longer need it, you discard it, all right? And hopefully you've achieved a new level of health. I firmly believe that we inherently have the capacity to use the power of our minds to heat and light a room, to transport us across distances. I believe that has been demonstrated by certain humans who had advanced understanding of this, some who are alive at this time. And I believe that that's going to become an increasingly common experience. But in the meantime, we're in this very dangerous transition period. And we need the technologies as a bridge. Now, is that a bridge for decades or centuries or millennia? I'm not sure. But it is a bridge. But I can tell you one thing, the technology itself is not a savior. The savior is the source that animates us, the love that is the foundation of doing all this in a way that's aligned with life. That's the source, you know, that's the savior here. It's not the technology, but it can teach us to use the technology properly while we need it. You know, and right now we know we're in challenging times. It's hard to keep ourselves balanced, but we need to remain vigilant against those distorting impulses. And Kimberly said it so well yesterday in her talk. What a beautiful heart-centered talk. What's my purpose here? That's how you come back to square when you start to feel that you've strayed. What is my purpose here? And I say this multiple times a day to myself when I get a little confused about it. My purpose here is healing. My purpose here is healing. All of this, any message I've given on any of this, it's all about that, period. It's not just about energy technologies or remediation of planets and all that. It's about how do we make this world a more beautiful place, because people have come into relationships that are aligned with life. And we do that, all the other stuff will fall under order, fall under our order, a higher order. And it's an amazing thing, and it's coming. It's coming. We are going to do that, but we're going to choose it freely. And it's going to be such an incredible experience for all of us. Really excited about this. And it means that we're going to have the chance to have that world that is as beautiful as our visions are bold. We can't possibly anticipate what it's all going to look like, right? But it will exceed our expectations, because the creativity of each of us is vast and it's powerful. So we can transform this world. And it's happening already. There's many ways for us each to get involved in that. And, you know, I welcome you to investigate New Energy Movement and these other things that are going on with the other presenters on how to personally get involved in that. And last, I'd like to acknowledge that the music and art, those communities and those endeavors that uplift us are very, very powerful in communicating the message. And all the art you saw here was courtesy of a very dear friend of mine, Sean Galloway, who also wrote the theme song for New Energy Movement. And he's a great guy, a dear brother. So thank you, Sean. And I thank all of you here. I really appreciate you being here, for showing up. And I also want to let you know I prayed for every one of you this morning. Thank you.